Hi folks. Okay, it is time for me to start putting out these videos. In my last video, I had talked about, sorry, I'm just trying to arrange this and lower it. Not to much avail. In my last video, I talked about the compass video. I talked about where we were at a couple of days ago and the fact that we need to start talking about the transits and the new moon in Cancer that is coming up on the 21st. Not that far away. Today is the 16th of No, today is the 15th of June. Good grief. But in about less than a week's time. And of course, the more important and relevant to this video news or information is that Mercury goes retrograde on June the 18th. Now, in my last video, I was using the dates June 19th to July 13th. And probably a more accurate date, depending on where you are, would be June 18th to July the 12th. So my apologies if that confused anyone. I know I may have sounded actually like I was saying June the 9th, but it was June the 19th. I think you'll know who you are who left the comment there. I appreciate you leaving the comment there and deleting it. I think you figured out what I was trying to say. But the bottom line is Mercury is retrograde in the sign of Cancer, and this is a Mercury in Cancer video from June the 18th to July the 12th. Mercury entered the sign of Cancer on May the 28th. So let's break this down, because this is not going to be a new moon solar eclipse video, but this is an important setup to that new moon solar eclipse in Cancer video that is coming up. The new moon solar eclipse is coming up, the second of three eclipses. The birds are agreeing with me, is coming up on June the 21st. So before we get to that and that video, I need to get this video laid out. Sorry, I almost feel like I need to address, partly because there was a sudden eclipsy loss in my family. The Mars-Neptune conjunction, I'm glad that it's behind us, and those of you who've been watching my videos for a while will know. It was, it's unclear when you're looking at road accidents whether you should look at Mercury or whether you should look at Mars, but certainly a certain amount of murkiness and a suddenness in the way that it happened. I just felt the need to acknowledge that. My past few videos, insofar as they concerned the full moon lunar eclipse in Sagittarius on June the 5th, and they talked about, and I know some other folks posted about losses. As I've mentioned to you, I just want to, during this eclipse time frame, sometimes, the frequency of people passing on transitions, getting news or information about terminal illnesses or processes, it just increases. And this is a rough year on a number of different levels. This is certainly a year of change, and with eclipses, sometimes there's a suddenness to them, and certainly some of the transits that have happened recently are tough. So if you are dealing with any of that, my condolences to you, and sort of an acknowledgement to just say that we have come through a pretty rough set of transits. Do they affect everyone in the same way and with the same kind of intensity, and does everyone experience a certain amount of roughness? No. As I said, eclipses, if they're bringing fated changes for you that are positive and dramatically positive or more exposure, then they do that too. But that's, for those people for whom the effects are more challenging, I just want to take a moment before I carry on and start setting up the next eclipse, the second of the three eclipses that we're in the middle of right now. Just kind of take a moment to acknowledge that. Okay. Mercury entered the sign of Cancer on May the 28th. On June the 18th, as I've already mentioned, Mercury goes retrograde. So I'll do it this way. Let's say Mercury enters the sign of Cancer on May the 28th. On June the 19th, 18th, I don't know why I'm so attracted to the June the 19th date. It goes retrograde. And then on July the 12th, it goes direct again. And on August the 4th, it leaves Cancer and goes into Leo. So it's a whole... Mercury typically spends about 3 weeks in a sign. So the fact that it's going to spend from May 28th to... Goodness, have I already forgotten this date? To August the 4th. May the 28th to August the 4th. Cheapers. That's over 2 months in one sign is significant. It's also significant because I can certainly feel this, and I don't know if you all are feeling it as well. 3 eclipses The first one on June the 5th in the new set of eclipses that we're going to be experiencing starting now into 2021 on the Sagittarius-Gemini axis. Second eclipse on June the 21st in the sign of Cancer. Third eclipse on July the 4th in the sign of Capricorn. The Cancer-Capricorn eclipses have been in place since July 2018. Okay? So when I say that Mercury, the planet of communication, came into the sign of Cancer on May the 28th and is going retrograde, and during this retrograde cycle, when Mercury comes in, goes retrograde on June, these dates, June the 18th, 3 days from now, 2.5 days from now, June the 18th, on June the 20th or 21st, depending on where you are at, just as Mercury's, just a couple of days after Mercury's gone retrograde, we have the new moon solar eclipse. And this year, every couple of years, we have 2 new moons or 2 full moons in the same sign. So this year, we have 2 new moons in the sign of Cancer. So while Mercury is retrograde, June the 18th, May the 28th, Mercury comes in. June the 18th, it goes retrograde. The moon comes in, and the very first degree of Cancer, there's a new moon solar eclipse on June the 20th or 21st, depending on where you are. Mercury is still going retrograde, and we have a full moon while the sun is in Cancer and the moon is in Capricorn on July the 4th. Mercury is still retrograde. It goes direct on June the 12th. And on June the 20th, we have the second new moon in Cancer in its last degree. And even though planets like the sun, even though planets are going to move into the sign of, and Mercury are going to move into the sign of Leo after they leave Cancer, the fact that we have another new moon on July the 20th in the sign of Cancer means that this kind of Cancer emphasis carries on till about August the 18th, till the new moon in Leo. On some level, we have 2 lunations in Cancer. And you cannot ignore this Mercury retrograde cycle and these 2 new moons, where one of the new moons is an eclipse. Let me summarize this again. Mercury, planet of communication, cognition, enters Cancer on May the 28th. It goes retrograde June the 18th. On June the 20th, you have the first new moon solar eclipse in the same sign. On July the 12th, Mercury goes direct. On July the 20th, you have the second new moon in Cancer, which takes this kind of Cancerian feeling up to August the 18th. Long time. The Cancer eclipses and where the sign of Cancer sits in your chart has presented some sort of a challenge to you. Could be positive, could be negative, that has to be overcome. It's a North Node eclipse. It's an eclipse of leaning into. Our growth and our development has had to do with leaning into the sign of Cancer, and the house where Cancer sits in your chart. Those of you who have charts and access to your chart, see where Cancer sits in your chart, what house it occupies, and what that house stands for. And since July of 2018, there has been a need to tackle issues, to pick up the proverbial sword, to slay the dragons, to go on your hero's journey, to develop skills, to develop courage, to take on, to lean into this particular part of your chart and tackle issues related to it. Some of these issues are going to be brought to you from the outside. A lot are going to be brought to you from the outside. Because, and by brought to you by the outside, I mean that there are things that are not of your initiating. So even if, for example, someone is dealing with an illness, you could say, well, that's coming from the inside because it's coming from inside the body, but it's still news that is brought to you. It is not actions that you are taking. You have to react, respond to whatever it is that the universe brings you when an eclipse happens. Because eclipses typically bring things that could very well be the fruition of your karma, and typically are the fruition of your karma. So again, this co-creation process takes place. But when God takes the wheel and delivers eclipsy stuff to us, we have to respond to it. Sometimes we end up reacting to it. Wherever the sign of Cancer sits in your chart has had a communication element presented to itself and has come into our consciousness since May the 28th. I know it has. I can tell for myself. I don't know if you can, but I'm going to pose this to you as an interesting challenge or something to think about. Wherever you've needed to lean into and grow since July 2018, has something come back to be dealt with one final time in some way since May the 28th? It's shown up again. Here I am. It could be a person, it could be a situation, it could be some dragon that has to be slayed. And because this is the last of the solar eclipses, the last eclipse in Cancer, the solar eclipse occurs on the 21st, and there's a lunar eclipse, not in the sign of Cancer, but in the sign of Gemini on November the 30th. By the time we get to the eclipses at the end of this year, on November the 30th and December the 14th, we are firmly in the Sagittarius Gemini eclipse. So we're firmly dealing with a new set of challenges, a new set of eclipses. But for people who like to think about the eclipses in a 6-month cycle, yes, one could argue that this new moon solar eclipse in Cancer on June the 21st sets up a 6-month arc that carries us into November the 30th, 2020 of this year. However, the most potent part of this, Mercury comes in May the 28th. You are forced to deal with past issues when it goes retrograde from the 18th of June until the July the 12th. Then you continue to tackle but put to bed, because you've also had the eclipse by that time and you're preparing this for the second new moon on July the 20th. Then after July the 12th, once Mercury goes direct, you are able to put to bed, hopefully, some of these issues that are coming up for revisiting. And June the 20th, you have your second new moon, and that takes us to August the 18th. So you can either look at the impact of the solar eclipse as a 6-month arc between June the 21st, which is when the eclipse happens, and November the 30th, which is when we have the corresponding lunar eclipse. We have a solar eclipse and a lunar eclipse to close out that cycle. I am going to look at it more as June the 21st, the solar eclipse, to August the 18th, the new moon in Leo. It's the last of these Cancer eclipses, and I think the most potent invitation to tackle something thematically or actually physically that has been put in front of you in July 2018 and said, here it is, you got to deal with this, or you got to deal with the consequences of this. You got to lean into and slay these dragons. You got to lean into and develop certain skills. You've got to remove a certain amount of fear. You've got to grow in this area. You've got to build weak muscles in this part of the chart. And it's a theme that has been going on since July 2018. The communication aspect of it came through when Mercury came in around May the 28th. That communication aspect could be communications, could be emails, could be phone calls, could be people showing up from around that time, and issues showing up. And in 2 days' time, Mercury goes retrograde. Now, the typical Mercury retrograde things apply, and you will see them showing up. A power outage, delays, thinking you have enough time for a meeting and finding you're in the middle of a traffic jam. I mean, I don't know where you're meeting, because even though things are lifting, they're not. But there's that. The communication being murky and awry and not clear. Remember, the last Mercury retrograde in February and March is when information about COVID started to come out, but was very confused. What is this? Can you get it this way? Can you get it? Lockdowns? It was not clear, but it was there. Around the date when Mercury goes retrograde in 2.5 days' time, on June the 18th, and when it goes direct on July the 12th, is when this retrograde energy will be felt at its peak. Miscommunications, lack of clarity, crossed wires, feeling like you're on the phone with people or talking to people or emailing people, and everything's just technical issues and challenges, snafus, things not working, all of that. Bizarre conversations with transportation, like catching a cab or an Uber or a bus. Bizarre, absurd conversations with customer service. Traffic delays, losing baggage, travel delays, misreading tickets, we can't always avoid signing a contract during Mercury retrograde, but remember, the advice is to try and delay things. As it is, Venus goes direct on the 25th of June. Mercury goes direct on July the 12th. I would delay decision making till July the 12th, I would say till July the 15th, even into the 20th, you are dealing with past issues. You're dealing with catching up with where we are at. As I've said numerous times, the relationship financial aspect of reevaluating starts to get done by around the 25th of July. You will see that this is true. This is why I said in my last video that in some ways when the summer goes, this is the toughest part of it. Now, some of it has to do with this Mars-Neptune conjunction. Some of it has to do with horrible news that many of us have received. Some of it has to do with just the fact that as these two important planets slow down, one to go retrograde, one to go direct, it's just, there's not a lot, the planet of trying to make sense of things is saying, I need to go back. We need to tackle some past issues going back to July 2018. The planet of reevaluating is saying, okay, after 6 weeks or so of reevaluating relationships and finances, where am I at? What decisions do I need to make? How am I going to move forward on this? There's a lot that's, till the end of June now, it doesn't have to be a violent time, and I hope it isn't, although the last lunation or the last new moon certainly set up tension, set up conflict, set up a certain amount of the potential for a certain amount of violence. A war and peace is what I called. War and peace is what I called the new moon in Gemini video that I did. But it's more, it could even if it's internal, it's not the clearest time. It is just not the clearest time. So as Mercury prepares to go retrograde, it's already showing up. It will only increase. Be patient with Mercury-related stuff going awry. Wireless networks going down. You thought this was at 9 o'clock, it's at 8 o'clock, all that kind of crap. I don't need to belabor that. And on June the 12th, the more important and the larger thing I want you to think about and focus on, if you can, is to look back at the eclipses, or look back at July 2018 and what has been put in front of you. If you know your chart, look at where Cancer, the sign of Cancer is in your chart, what house it occupies, and what sort of challenge it is that you have been asked to lean into and develop some skills around that could be terrifying to you, but it's where your soul growth lies. And since May the 28th, a certain amount of communication, previous issues kind of landing on your plate, it is a time to tackle past issues. It is a time to put past things to bed to some extent, so that as the energies become more forward moving by the middle of July to the end of July, we can really start to, at that time, deal with a certain amount of forward movement. Right now, we're still dealing with, there's still murkiness and all this opening up, as I mentioned with the COVID thing. This Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, this kind of death and transformation and new beginnings and endings conjunction on June the 29th, I'm still uncomfortable. Just pay attention to where you are and be careful when it comes to exposure. We're still dealing with trying to understand what is going on and what its impact is and how to incorporate things before we're really in a place where we're going to be ready to move forward. And even then, as I've mentioned, my feeling as far as the virus is concerned is there's another once more onto the breach that we're going to deal with as we head to the end of November before we really have a sense of how we're tackling this. So maybe that's the time when we get some information with regard to how to tackle it. I'm going all over the place. Mercury in Cancer, communication, cognition. To some extent, it can be commuting. It can be siblings, cousins, relatives. Mercury is a planet that rules all of that. Messengers, the mail, post, processing thing, contracts, agreements, signatures, handshakes. Be careful looking at contracts. If it's a number is supposed to be 10,000, someone can put 100,000 or 1,000. And once you sign it, then you have this Mercury ready. Look at things 3 times. Make sure you look at communications. This is not a time to hit send on social media or email without really, with Mercury retrograde, people will say look at something 3 times as opposed to 1 time to be absolutely sure that all the details, all the I's are dotted, T's need to be crossed. Doesn't mean you can't sign if it feels right. You just gotta. But as I said, if some decision making, unless you have Mercury retrograde in your birth chart, which may put an interesting twist on things. If you were born at a time when Mercury is retrograde, you may find yourself actively in sync. Do during a Mercury retrograde period. But if that is not the case, I know I repeat myself in these videos, but I do it for all sorts of reasons. But at the same time, it's still worth it, I think, generally speaking, to push some decision making and signing on the dotted line and really being clear about where you want to go on certain things till at least the middle of July, if not as you head into the end of July. The communication aspect of whatever it is that you've been dealing with since July 2018, whether it is a person, whether it's a topic, whether it's something you have to think about, you have to contend with, whether it is something that is brought to you from the perspective and the place of communication. So let's say you've been dealing with something or a topic or a subject since July 2018, and it's been simmering along and you know you need to deal with it and there's some final touch or whatever it is. It could come to you through communication. That could be an email or a phone call or something like that, and something from the past comes up for you to tackle. The idea with a final eclipse, Mercury comes in, you start to think about it, Mercury sets on the gauntlet, it puts the communication down, and then after putting the communication down, it says, okay, June the 18th, I'm reversing and we're going to tackle this. We're going to deal with this. As confusing as it is going to be, we've got to break this down and we've got to try and make sense of things. And during this time, just as I reverse 2 days after that, there'll be the eclipse. The purpose of this Mercury retrograde, along with this eclipse, is to give you one more chance. And I don't want to say this as though, oh my God, I only have one more chance to deal with this. That's not my... There are lessons that we've needed to learn and muscles we've needed to strengthen and somewhere where we've needed to grow and develop, where the sign of Cancer sits in your chart. Maybe we've needed to grow in Cancerian themes, nurture, the heart, mothering, leaning more towards the feminine as opposed to the masculine, protecting. So if you were to look at the sign and the qualities that we're being asked to lean into, it's not the colder, more achievement-oriented qualities and characteristics of Capricorn as much as it is the more emotionally and nurture-motivated, protective impulses of the sign of Cancer. I will still maintain the house is more important than the sign. So which house it occupies and what that stands for, if you know your chart, is what to look into. The planet of communication comes in May 28th, brings something to you, you're pondering it. By the time you get to June the 18th, my friends, you have no choice. You've got to deal with it one more time, and you've got to see if you've learned enough and you've conquered your fears enough to get in there and take care of something and deal with it. I'm giving the broadest possible application of this eclipse. For some people, it could just be an opportunity that needs to be tackled, an offer. Something comes through again. Something has to be dealt with again. We need to look at something again, something along those lines, or something from the past that has to be done and dealt with and put to bed. We deal with this till July the 12th, and it's not necessarily going to, it has to be dealt with because not only do we have Mercury retrograde, but it comes with an eclipse. So we've got to lean into it and tackle this between June the 21st and August the 18th of this year. But the energies are more retrospective and a little bit more confused, and the communication is more garbled, and the eclipse-like throwdown is more pronounced till about June the 15th. June the 12th, Mercury goes direct. And so we give it a few days to start to move again. And it's after June the 15th that certain things can be, after July the 15th, forgive me, July the 12th, Mercury goes direct. After July the 15th, that we can finally be like, all right, now I have between July the 15th to August the 18th, and certainly from a communication perspective till August the 4th, when Mercury leaves Cancer and goes into Leo, to be able to put these things in place and put them to bed. Our focus is now going to shift. After June, for the first half of this year, the eclipses were the eclipses, and a lot of our focus was also on the sign of Pisces and where that sits in the chart. We are now going to be invited to deal with a solar eclipse in the sign of Cancer, so that presents us with an opportunity to lean into the sign of Cancer. And then at the end of June, Mars enters Aries. So the focus is now going to shift to the signs of Cancer and Aries in our charts with regard to where it is that we're going to be asked to tackle things and look at them. The shift in focus is not unwelcome, but part of the shift in focus requires going back and tackling things that have been put in front of us as challenges since July 2018. Okay. Okay, I'm going to develop this more, although thematically it introduced a lot here. I'm going to develop this more now. I think the next video to do, it would be the new moon solar eclipse in Cancer video, which is on June the 21st. This date slipping thing is also very Mercury retrograde. It's like I have to like put 3 times the focus into being coherent, or at least call information. It's very Mercury retrograde. Already starting to happen. We're 2 days away. It's gonna be in place. So identify, see where it is that you were meant to lean into and build some skills or strengths. That could be an offer, it could be an opportunity, it could be a challenge. See if it's come back in some ways since May the 27th from a communication perspective, and lean into it and slay those dragons now. Even though some aspect of it requires going back and taking, you might be looking at previous emails, previous communications, you might be going back and taking a look at previous things, previous agreements, a need to relook at and replan things, a need to acknowledge curveballs, at least while Mercury's retrograde is going to be present. It's only once Mercury is direct on July the 12th, and as it starts to gather momentum after July the 15th, between July the 15th and August the 4th, that you may feel that we can actually seal the deal on some of these things and put pen to paper and sign certain things and put them in place in a way that are satisfactory. The other thing that is interesting in all this actually is that the sign of Cancer and the sign of Aries square each other. So again, there's a certain amount of tension between Mars and Aries. I'm just realizing tension. A year of change and transformation and metamorphosis. 2020. Okay, well, I'll develop that more. If you like this video, found it useful, feel free to share it, comment on it, like it. All of that helps get the video some circulation. My contact information is in the description area. You can contact me if you want me to make an easy-to-read version of your chart that shows you which signs are in which houses. You will need to know your birth time for that. Do not send me your birth time. First, ask about rates. Be sure you are comfortable with the rates and you want to commit to this before you send me any personal information. You can also inquire about readings and how much they cost. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, please, if you aren't already, and click on the bell icon next to the subscribe button so that you can be notified whenever I do new videos. Next one is going to be on the new moon solar eclipse, unless I get some sort of epiphany or inspiration to do something else, but ultimately I'm going to have to do that. Consider yourself notified. Since May the 28th, there's been activity in Cancer, the sign of Cancer, and this is only going to get stronger. The sun enters Cancer in 3 or 4 days' time, and just after the sun enters, we have the eclipse. So 2 days after Mercury goes retrograde. Can't make this stuff up. Interestingly, after Mercury leaves Cancer on August the 4th, on August the 7th, Venus, which has been retrograde in Gemini, reevaluating, I've done lots of videos on Venus retrograde, you can go back and look at those, enters Cancer on August the 7th. So as I said, the Cancer season continues, and there's something interesting about all this communication and rewind activity, like having to go back and kind of deal with and tackle, and this kind of final, do we graduate? You know, it's like the challenges that have been put in front of us since July 2018. It's an opportunity to figure out if we graduate. And with North Node eclipses, because we have to develop the strengths, it's not like you're looking out to come out of this with an A+. A B- is fine, a C+ is fine. Just make the effort and make sure that you are building the muscle, and understand that the growth is what is really important, because you will carry the lessons of that soul growth into whatever the next set of, this is where the development, this is where the soul is, this is what is necessary. This is the cup that you need to drink from. The Capricorn eclipse, which is going to happen, a lunar eclipse in July the 4th, is an eclipse of release. 2 eclipses of release over the summer, don't we know it? And 1 eclipse of leaning into. And the eclipse of leaning into has to deal with past issues. So we're going to be looking for that. And as the eclipse, followed by another new moon, with Mercury retrograde in the middle, as the Mercury retrograde wraps up, then Venus, the planet of money and relationships, comes into Cancer. A sign I think she's pretty happy in, and tries to smooth things out. You can't make up some of these things. So fascinating. All right. Until my next video.